You're listening to Food Trucks in Babylon, a Western Seminary podcast with Dr. Todd Miles and Dr. Patrick Schreiner. Listen as they discuss matters of faith, theology, and culture in a post-Christian world.
Hey, this is Patrick.
And this is Todd.
And today we are talking about marijuana. And we are joined here by Jeff Lacine. He's a local pastor, and he's a pastor at Selwood Baptist Church, actually right down the road from where I go to church. How long have you been there, Jeff?
It's almost 6 years now.
Almost 6 years. Great. And Jeff is not just known for his knowledge on marijuana, but he has written, I think, a pretty important article for Desiring God. Is that where it originally came out?
That was the first article. Yep.
Okay, and so he's known as like the weed pastor now because of that.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Didn't you tell me though that like people stop you and you're like, hey, you wrote that article on marijuana?
Well, I get emails and phone calls of people wanting to have long conversations about marijuana from all over the country.
Well, we're sorry to just continue in that, but
what I've become known for.
You know what I found is it does not take much to carve out expert status on this issue.
There's not many people talking about it.
It's really not.
Yeah,
and yet everybody wants to know something about it.
That's right.
So it's a relevant issue. We're in Oregon, and it's legal here. It's legal in Washington. And so as people are listening to this, maybe around the country, this is something that churches are dealing with here because it is legal in the states that are around us. And so we need to think biblically and well about these things. So maybe, Todd, I'll just start with you. The way you have framed this, you go around and you speak as well to churches about this issue.
I do.
Is that this provides us an opportunity to think about something that's not explicitly in the Bible, but still think about it biblically. Why do you think that's so important to actually engage in this type of conversation?
Well, because I think it allows us the chance to think in a Christian manner. It forces us to, not just allows us the chance. It forces us to do this because, as you know, the Bible's not a cookbook, right? Yeah. It's not an instruction manual. It's not an exhaustive encyclopedia of all things God. It is a narrative of redemption. Right. There are some commands in there, but it's not exhaustive.
Right.
And yet we're supposed to take every thought captive in obedience to Christ. We're supposed to think God's thoughts after him. And here's an issue that you will not find in the scriptures,
right.
no matter, even if you have like the ESV study Bible, you will not find anything in there on this. There might be some references to weed, but I don't think that's really what the scriptures are talking about here. And yet it's a very significant issue with clear ethical implications and discipleship implications.
Yep. And you, with our just fast changing culture, this is going to become more and more the case in terms of issues that aren't explicitly maybe in the Bible that we have to think ethically about. You came to our church and actually did a training on it, and I just remember this line that you had, and now I probably won't say it as well as you did, but that when it was illegal, the church wasn't made to think about it biblically. And sometimes we actually fall into not thinking about things biblically because they're illegal. But actually the legalism or the legalization of marijuana has caused Christians to say, okay, now that it's legal, do we actually have a Christian response to this?
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful just in terms of framing. We should actually be doing that for all issues, whether it's legal or illegal. The state shouldn't be determining what's moral for Christians, right?
That's right.
There could be some overlap, obviously,
sure.
but
and maybe in the past, the federal, local, state governments were a semi-reliable guide to ethics. But we can all think of examples where there's some things that the state says are okay to do that we know are sinful, right? And like lust and gluttony,
right.
and I don't want the government prosecuting those things,
exactly.
but we know they're sinful,
right?
And so just because something's legal doesn't mean that it's okay from a Christian worldview.
Yeah. And so one thing I want to get to Jeff in a question really quick here, but you've had some interesting proposals for titles for a talk on this. So can you just give me a few, and maybe we can add some other ones in terms of.
So the very first time that I did a talk on this was at a pastor's convention, and it just on ethical issues, and everybody made fun of it when I kind of introduced it. It was like this running joke, but it was standing room only. Everybody came.
Yeah.
And I called it something like the Christian and cannabis.
There you go.
And then from that point on, everybody, hey, how about the deacon and the doobie, or the Baptist and the blunt, or the Trinity and tree, so the minister of marijuana.
Can I add
go
a
for
few?
it. Sure.
Justification in the joint.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Puff, puff, perseverance, or something like that.
Now that one I haven't heard.
What about this one? If you go to a Catholic church, you could say Mary Jane and the Virgin Mary.
Oh, nice.
Something like that,
you
right?
Could do that.
Can you think of any, Jeff?
Wow.
Any off the top of your head?
I have been surprised by some of the titles that my article. I haven't chosen a title for any one of the articles that I have online, so every one of them I've been a little disappointed with.
Well, we just gave you a bunch of great titles that
that's
you
great.
could use. I'm sure there's other ones that we could think of, and so you can email us if you're listening in. You can email us some great titles that we could use and steal.
That's wonderful.
Jeff, you mentioned in your article that you're not into like quick pat answers for this issue. Why is that the case?
Yeah, I really like what Todd just said about the purpose, the function of the Bible in the Christian's life is not as a rule book. It's to form a kind of way of thinking. It's to form a heart, form a person. By the Holy Spirit, God uses His Word to form in us a disposition and a kind of thinking, a way of thinking about the world. And so I think too quickly in the past, Christians and we as a church have reached to giving quick answers. We see a problem. People are getting drunk. So therefore, let's just say no more drinking alcohol. And unfortunately, that is creating, much like the Pharisees did in certain ways, a fence around the law, the clear commands of Scripture, adding a kind of second canon around Scripture that isn't helpful in Christian discipleship.
That's helpful. That's good. So maybe we can get a little bit into some of the science just to begin with. I know none of us are necessarily medical experts on this, but maybe you've done some study on this. And so can you just, one of you, explain how weed, cannabis works? What's the science behind it? What does it do to our brains, as far as you know?
Well, there's a lot. It does a lot because there's many components to the cannabis plant, and which has differing, almost contradictory effects. Technically, cannabis acts as a stimulant and also as a depressant. It just depends on what part of the brain you're talking about. Probably the biggest issue is around THC. That is, it serves as what we call an agonist of the cannabinoid receptors in the brain. So basically, it's just something that stimulates it to start releasing certain either chemicals, or it activates receptors in the brain. For us though, probably the most significant thing that THC does is it stimulates this response in the brain that causes the brain to release dopamine, which is this kind of pleasure feeling sensation chemical that I would say God has blessed us with. He did not have to do it this way. THC puts that on overdrive.
Do you know what THC stands for?
I actually do. Tetrahydrocannabinol.
Okay.
Is what it stands for.
Like a very, and then
so we'll just say THC because I don't think I could pronounce that.
I don't want to keep on that.
In a row.
Yeah.
Referring to it by
So, do you know the difference between CBD and THC? So in Oregon now, you have CBD different drinks now, right? You have CBD kombucha,
beer,
right, or whatever.
Yeah, yep.
And so, and honestly, from my own story too, I was diagnosed with arthritis, and one of the things they said is to go get some CBD to help with those things. And so my immediate question was like, well, is it like going to get me high? Like, what do I do with this?
Yeah, and hopefully
CBD
they said no,
thing?
right?
Well, the guy that I was buying the weed from was like, no, I'm just kidding. No, they did say no. And they said what you're looking for is like a topical cream, which a lot of people have used. So this is, I actually have gone, I went into a store on Hawthorne Pharma.
I've been there.
And you've been to Pharma too. And I got some CBD because it's supposed to reduce inflammation. Sure. And actually mine had THC in it, but it was topical.
Is this like confession?
I guess so. Everyone knows now. It had THC in it, and I asked the guy, I was like, so will this get me high? And he said, not if it's topical, only if you ingest it. So anyways, CBD, THC, how should we think through?
CBD is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid.
Okay.
There's no mind-altering effects. It might be useful useful in reducing pain, inflammation.
Okay. So the jury's a little bit out on that.
But from a pastoral perspective, you can bathe in this stuff. I don't care.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? I mean, now there might be a money stewardship issue at that point if you're bathing in CBD because the stuff's expensive, right?
Yeah, it is expensive.
And
I can testify to that.
I think it's important too to differentiate between the medical usage and the recreational usage of both CBD and THC, because I was talking to someone in the medical profession recently about CBD, and they were saying, well, it depends on what you mean by mind altering. Like there are some people that are claiming that it's calming.
Okay.
Different things like that. And so to what degree does it affect someone's mood? I don't know. I haven't personally used it. I don't know the science behind it. But I'm coming at the whole thing not from a scientific perspective, but from a pastoral perspective. And obviously I want to learn from people like in the medical field from in my church and things like that. But I think Todd's right that, you can douse yourself with CBD and not, have hallucinations.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you see your deacon drinking a CBD infused whatever, we shouldn't have any issues. All right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
just to be clear.
Yes.
Because there could be questions out here about that. And
I think CBD functions like an essential oil.
right.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned, I think this is good. We're not going to get into a lot of the distinction. We want to get to pastoral issues, but my own question, if you're using medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, is it the same composition? Is it something different? Do they act in the same way? What's the difference between these, or is there a difference?
So this is where there's need for nuance, because we're talking about a plant that has lots of different strains of the plant. So there's varying levels of THC from plant to plant. Okay. There's varying levels of CBD from plant to plant. There's varying levels of other cannabinoids. There's lots of other chemicals that are involved, and people are different too. Yeah, so our body chemistry is different from person to person, and so someone that is in the medical field might recommend a certain strain of marijuana to address a certain issue that may have very little or no THC in it. They're even developing strains that have very small amounts of THC, if any. But for other purposes, someone that is really wanting to get high is going to look for a strain with a lot of THC in it in order to affect them, their mood.
We're going to get to more of the ethics. Do you want to add something to that? I want to ask another question about...
No, I was just going to say that at least from a plant perspective, there's no difference between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana.
People use the same for both.
Yeah, it's just maybe the motive there. And I think it was important too that you said that a doctor recommends, that you can't really prescribe marijuana per se, because there's no dosage. It makes it very difficult.
Gotcha.
Which is why this is such a complicated issue.
Right. So from the medical side, my question is, so if there's THC in there, and we're going to get to, maybe, I know I'm kind of jumping the gun here in terms of, is it okay to get high? First of all, we're going to address that. But I'm just assuming right now that there's a negative view from a Christian standpoint of getting high with THC. But what if you're on the medical side and there's something about either the way your brain works and you're having issues, and the certain chemical that causes you to get high actually calms down certain maybe anxiety or... I know the research is still going on this, but do you have any thoughts in terms of do you know of a place or a symptom or a diagnosis where, this THC actually can have these medical benefits? Does that make my question make sense?
Well, there are a number of places where we know for sure. There's scientific, good, strong, like FDA scientific backing on this. FDA might not be the correct term, but it does suppress nausea. We know that. It's effective. THC does suppress nausea, and it acts, and now this is no surprise, right? it increases appetite, which we all knew that, right? But no,
onions.
Yes, that's right. Scientifically, it does. And so if you're if you're sick and if you're on like chemotherapy, which is causing you to be nauseated, which is also reducing your appetite, then to be able to isolate these different components, it could have really strong medical usage.
Okay. And so so someone in your church is going through chemo and they're saying, my doctor is prescribing this, what would your response be to them?
Or recommending.
Recommending. Yeah, sorry.
Although there are some drugs that have been
derived
from the cannabis plant for this very thing. And you can do that.
Yeah, and I'm going to be leaning into the medical professionals at this point. When someone's going into something that's been diagnosed and is using a whatever chemical compound to treat the symptoms of their issue or to treat the issue itself, I'm going to be leaning into, I'm not a doctor. I'm a pastor. That's not my area of expertise. I'm going to be dealing with the pastoral issues. Can someone be addicted to a prescription medication? Can someone misuse a prescription medication? Yes, and that's where I'll be involved.
That's right. Okay. And see, I think that's another reason why this is such a helpful issue now, is because there's still a bit of a stigma attached to marijuana, and now doctors are kind of recommending. And there's certainly a lot of information out there. Hey, this might help me, but because there's a stigma, Christians might be thinking, well, is it okay to do this?
Yeah.
And I think we should have been asking that about a lot of different drugs. I mean, we are in an opioid addiction epidemic in the United States right now.
Yeah.
Opioids are more addictive, more mind-altering, and
there's probably just as many people in our churches that are struggling with opioid addictions and opioid use abuse problems as marijuana problems.
Probably more.
Yeah,
probably more. And so maybe we should have been asking these kinds of questions.
Yeah, that's good.
About a lot of the different drugs that are prescribed.
Really What about, I know we're doing the medical side early, but I just want to ask, what about medical dangers? Do we know of risks that come with this as well? Because we know there are some benefits, and people are preaching about that, but what about risks? Do we know of risks as well that are existent in using this?
Well, you're putting smoke in your lungs, and the American Lung Association doesn't like that.
Sure,
So there's good, solid science backing this. And for young people especially, this is just not a good idea, because it's like 9 out of 9 dentists surveyed have said that smoking marijuana interferes with brain development. And if you're at an age where your brain is still developing, and for women, that could be up to maybe late teens, early 20s. For men, the brain doesn't stop developing until they're in their late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those are two of the significant health risks that need to be put out there. Yeah,
and just observationally, and there's been some early studies done on this, associating regular marijuana use with amotivational syndrome.
Oh.
So, which is just a fancy way of saying I've lost motivation to do certain things, to ambition to live. And we see that, right? We see that in people that are habitually using marijuana.
Anecdotally.
And that was a part of my own experience before I was a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been great. I think after the break, what we should jump into, which is just the tough issue of really the relationship between like alcohol and caffeine and smoking cannabis, and some of the ways maybe it's like and unlike alcohol, or like and unlike caffeine, and some of the biblical texts that we could go to kind of think well about this in a Christian way. And so after the break, we'll get to that.
Hi, my name is Eric, and I'm in the MDiv program at Western Seminary. My favorite part about studying here is being able to develop those close relationships with fellow students in and outside of the classroom, while discovering how I can love God with my whole life. I also really appreciate that my professors care about what I'm learning alongside my personal spiritual formation. Western Seminary offers a number of programs to help students prepare for the work God has called them to do through rigorous education designed with practical application. If you are interested in learning more about Western or starting your application, visit us online at westernseminary.edu. Now, back to the show.
We're still getting into the weeds about yeah, that's it.
That's good. It was
About
good.
weed. Okay. One of the things that we like to do each time is ask our guest or whoever's here about a food cart that you're enjoying right now. So you're in Selwood.
Yep.
Is there a food cart in
There
Selwood
is.
that you're especially enjoying?
Yep, and this one just opened up, and it's literally probably 150 feet from my office door, so it's really dangerous.
This could be bad news for you.
Yeah, it's right across the street there on Tacoma, and I don't know the name of it, but they have barbecue pork, and instead of rice, because I'm doing keto right now, so instead of rice, I have them do fried Brussels sprouts, and this barbecue pork, and I'm sure it's got some sugar in the sauce, but I don't ask. But it's so tasty, so recommend that highly.
Barbecue pork. You know the one I'm just gonna add something. The one I'm liking in Selwood. I think it's called Mumbo Gumbo.
Where's that?
It's over. There's that little food cart pod past Tolman and like down past. You know what I'm talking about? There's like a tiny little one, but it's great gumbo food. It's really good.
I'll have to check
and the
that
guy
out.
who works there is like really friendly.
Cool.
Really like him. So.
Cool.
I enjoy going to that one. Okay, well, we're going to get into some of the more of the ethical issues with marijuana, cannabis, and I think the typical questions that arise when you begin talking about this is the difference between even caffeine or probably the closer correlation would be alcohol and smoking cannabis. So Todd has already asserted that cannabis works like a depressant and a stimulant, and alcohol works in a very similar way. Now, I know in the Christian world there's different views on drinking alcohol, but here in the Pacific Northwest,
There's only one view.
there's only one view basically. And so if
This is why I don't belong in the Pacific Northwest.
Are you a teetotaler?
I don't even like coffee, let alone
really?
beer.
Okay.
So I just don't like bitter things at all.
So obviously the question then becomes, though, if we can drink alcohol, and we could even go to some texts maybe in terms of people drinking wine to gladden the heart, so forth and so on. If we can do that and it's a stimulant and depressant, why not smoke cannabis? Like, why doesn't this just fall into the can of alcohol and say you don't go crazy with it, but if you do it in moderation, you're okay. So can you maybe give us some ways that cannabis is like and unlike alcohol?
Yeah,
Jeff?
so it's a reasonable question because there are similarities, right? There are some things that overlap as far as alcohol and cannabis. Cannabis, like alcohol, is an organic substance. You know, alcohol is a naturally occurring organic substance. Cannabis is a plant. Cannabis, like alcohol, has the potential to intoxicate and distort reality. Both of those substances can distort our vision of what is real. Cannabis, like alcohol, has different effects on someone who uses it regularly, habitually, than someone who only uses it occasionally. So if you have someone that has a glass of wine every night and then they have 2 glasses one night, it's going to affect them differently than someone that doesn't drink it at all. Same with cannabis use. And both can be habit forming. You know, you get people that are in need of counseling and therapy and help to break the habit. They become reliant on each of those substances. But there are important ways that cannabis is different than alcohol. One way is you can't black out or die from an overdose on cannabis, as far as I know. So that's one difference. Unlike alcohol, there are many different strains of cannabis. So when we're talking about alcohol,
Man, what about craft beer?
well, it's the same substance. It's not
Okay.
So,
All right.
but you have THC combining with all these different cannabinoids in every different strain. Every different strain is going to be different.
And the way people react to them are very different too.
Absolutely.
Which is another difference with
Yep.
alcohol, isn't it?
Yep. Marijuana has many different effects on an individual due to its complex chemical makeup. So one article I read said there's 113 different chemical compounds, and I've heard different numbers. Some say over 200 chemical pounds in a cannabis plant. Another difference is that, and this is an important difference, is the Bible speaks directly to alcohol, and actually, some would say even commands its use in one of the ordinances of the church. Jesus drank alcohol, and it's really clear in the Bible that it is not a sin in itself to drink alcohol, that there is a God-given, God-glorifying use of alcohol that's clearly.
Do we know
prescribed
when
in Scripture.
cannabis was found? Like, does anyone know the history of that? Like, did they have it in the first century? Do we have any records of it?
I've read.
I'm not
a
a cannabis historian, so do you have? You
I'm
guys
not
have any
leaning to
idea?
Todd
I have
here.
nothing.
You
I
have
have nothing on
Okay.
that one.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know, right?
Yeah,
if
it
there
would be.
was, like, if we have any evidence about, obviously, it's
There's
a plant.
certainly there's certainly evidence of mind-altering drugs being used early,
Right.
During biblical times. There's questions about what's the Greek word, pharma something or other, but that's usually translated sorcery in the
Pharmakeia.
Scripture. Yeah,
Mhm.
pharmakeia.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually translated sorcery, not
Right.
not like a mind-altering drug or just a drug of any kind.
Okay, yeah. I think I interrupted you in terms
Yeah.
of you were going through some differences, right?
Yeah, and I think that these differences, so acknowledging that there is a special place in alcohol for alcohol in the Bible, that it even says it was given to gladden the heart of man. It's a picture that points us forward to the second coming of Christ. I mean, Jesus said at the Lord's table, I will not drink of this wine until I come again in my kingdom. And so it points us forward to that marriage supper that we will have with Jesus in this celebratory way. And that's why I think it's really appropriate for there to be a glass of wine at a wedding that points us forward to the ultimate reality of that, and looking to the consummation of the wedding of Christ and his church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Todd, you had a story about a difference between, one of the things you have identified in your teaching is that you went into one of the stores and asked a certain question, pharma, in terms of is there any, why don't you just tell the story, because I think it's helpful in terms of a difference too.
Well, the issue is, can you smoke marijuana in moderation? You can drink in moderation.
Exactly.
Right? And so alcohol, or the use of alcohol, becomes sinful in Scripture when you drink to excess and you become drunk.
Right.
Drunkenness is prohibited.
Clearly.
And the great thing, the great thing about the Scriptures when it comes to alcohol is it doesn't just forbid it. It actually tells us why drunkenness is a bad thing.
Very helpful.
And so we get all sorts of insight into that about, for purposes of discipleship even, why drunkenness will get in the way of sanctification, why it's a sign of judgment, why, so there's all sorts of different things there. But there is clearly, as Jeff said, there's a place in the Scripture for the appropriate use of alcohol. I just got done saying that I don't drink, but I would argue that alcohol is a gift from God, right? And
couldn't you say that for cannabis? It's a plant from the ground.
Well, I think you could. I think you could,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we're seeing some of the benefits of cannabis,
right? Medically,
as different components are being isolated and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Now, where alcohol becomes sinful is at the level of drunkenness, and so if we were to correlate the two, we'd say, well, where cannabis then marijuana becomes sinful is at the level of being high, being intoxicated, inebriated, and so I went to pharma.
And pharma, just to be clear,
pharma is just a place down. Yeah. This episode sponsored by pharma.
Everyone from Western is going to be going there
on Hawthorne Boulevard. So I went there, but they were super helpful. They were super helpful once I got in.
Very professional too.
Very
professional.
And they were very willing to answer all my questions there. But one of them that I asked was, can you tell me about like moderate use of marijuana?
Right.
Like, can you? Is there a reason to smoke recreationally apart from getting high? And they looked at me just dumbfounded.
Why would you ask that question?
Yeah,
Why would you ever want to smoke this plant
that's what they
and
asked.
not get high?
And
This is what it means to be a Christian in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah,
we ask weird questions.
You ask these dumb questions like that. Yeah. Can you and so I mean, I thought that was interesting. They looked at me. They looked at me like it was just an imbecilic question.
Yeah,
right.
I do want to bring up one more difference between the two. That unlike alcohol, cannabis use is strongly correlated with mental health disorders such as dissociative schizophrenic disorder. So you will talk to people that are social workers, health workers that will strongly be against regular marijuana use, where in the same way of someone having a beer, unless they're an alcoholic, it's not going to affect their mind in the same way over the long haul during regular habitual use.
So wait, so what you're saying is you can become immune to it, and it doesn't have the same effect on you.
No, what I'm saying is...
Is that what you're saying?
No, so what I'm saying is with marijuana, it's been associated as kind of a trigger for schizoaffective disorder. Okay. Which is kind of a precursor to schizophrenia, as I understand it. So oftentimes you'll hear in stories of people that have schizophrenia of them being regular marijuana users. It doesn't mean that someone using marijuana it's necessarily going to lead to schizophrenia, but it's often a part of people's stories that have different mental health disorders.
Do you build up a tolerance though to marijuana? Do you all know in terms of, the reason this becomes practical is because we're getting to the question of, can you smoke marijuana without getting high, right? That's a key question here. And I'm imagining someone in your church becomes a Christian, they've smoked weed all their life, and they're asking, is this okay? And they're like, well, if I just do a little bit, it doesn't get me high anymore because I've built up a tolerance. And what do you do in that situation? So can you build up a tolerance like alcohol? Because I know you can with alcohol.
It affects you differently, certainly. People do report, having even hallucinations when they're not using it frequently, where that's very uncommon for someone that's using it frequently, and it affects you differently.
Okay. So you can build up
some tolerance,
but it still affects you differently than alcohol is kind of your conclusion. Like a tolerance to alcohol.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it's being cultivated for higher and higher THC levels as well.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
You've probably heard people say that like today's marijuana is not your grandfather's marijuana.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So, but Todd, back to you. Your pharma experience was pretty much that they were saying there's no point of smoking weed recreationally. You get high immediately? Is that what happens? I mean...
Well, I don't think that's the case. Quicker, certainly.
Yeah.
Quicker. Just like if you were to use an edible, you have to digest it, and it takes longer.
Right.
But
the point is to get high.
Smoking something is a pretty quick way to get into your bloodstream.
Right.
It's a very effective way, short of just mainlining it, I suppose.
You've had experience in the past with it, right?
Right.
Is that so? The experience. So I'm trying to again get to the alcohol. Someone can drink a beer and be sober-minded.
That's correct. Yeah.
Can you smoke or ingest?
Yeah, and I want to, and this is where,
not be high.
Well, this is where I do want to say enter local church, because there are different strains of marijuana.
Okay.
There are some that have very little THC. And I just think that if someone is pursuing use of marijuana recreationally, they're doing so to alter their minds.
Right.
And we need to ask probing questions.
Yeah.
We need to ask probing questions about, is this helping to clarify reality? Because I would argue that even a moderate use of alcohol has a clarifying on the whole.
That's why you drank 3 beers before this?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did not. If there's any members of my church listening to this, I did not have
It's
any
9 a.m.
Even if I sound like it, you've heard me sound like this before. So, no. But I would say that it's this picture right? It's this picture that's pointing us forward. This that gives us it makes glad the heart of man, right? Okay. And it's a picture that points us forward to full redemption.
So wait, okay, I'm being devil's advocate here, but so sugar and caffeine is altering my mind in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Is it clarifying or distorting?
If I'm addicted to caffeine in the morning and I need my coffee, aren't I altering something in my chemical balance to give me that energy? And then sugar is also firing off. I don't even know what it's firing off, but it does something in our brains.
Sure.
I'm not an expert on this stuff.
It does. I think you could argue that you actually need sugar. So maybe the caffeine would be a better one to stick with at this point.
Yeah. So so you're we're always altering like mind sets, but so what's the difference in cannabis? Like, why can't we alter in that way?
I think the question to ask is it being used to distort reality or to clarify? So you have the picture of the groggy mom that's waking up with little kids and she didn't get very much sleep last night. She grabs the cup of coffee so she can be more engaged as a mom and with what God has before her that day, and it's a gift from God in that way. Okay. So yes, does it serve her? Right. Does it serve her mind and her body to be wakeful and to carry out what God has for her? Yes, and that's a good thing.
Okay. So you distort if you go to the doctor and you go under anesthesia, right? You distort reality so you don't feel anything.
Yeah.
And it serves you.
It serves you.
It serves you.
It serves you that way.
Yeah. And that's why it's different, right? Because you're...
Well, I would say that's an acute issue. It's not a chronic issue.
Okay.
That's a good distinction.
And which I think is why the whole medical issue is...
That's a whole nother...
We should see it as different.
Okay. And so in terms of like biblical ideas that feed into this discussion, I've already mentioned one, sober-minded. Because we hear drunkenness and we're like, okay, so drunkenness is bad, that's clear. Yeah. But there's actually kind of a theology behind why not to be drunk. You've already alluded to that. But either of you want to give just kind of ethical... who we are as Christians, how we're supposed to be formed, thoughts on, okay, so if marijuana recreationally, you smoke it, it makes you high, what biblical considerations then come in? I know we've touched on these, but let's kind of zero in on them a little more.
Well, certainly the inebriation would be,
right.
We'd have to look at that. Just from a Christian discipleship perspective at this point, we are told that we are to be controlled by the Spirit.
Amen.
Not by mind or behavior altering drugs. And the Christian life, I think, is to be lived intentionally. I love about Jesus, he was not a bait and switch guy. He wanted us to go in with our eyes open. He wanted us to count the cost. He wanted us to take up our cross, and so we're told to live intentionally, no divided loyalties, no double-mindedness. Being a follower of Christ, in one sense, is easy, as Jesus said. My burden is light, he says. But we are constantly battling the world, the flesh, and the devil, and following Jesus is not easy in that regard. And we need to have our faculties about us. We need to be thinking. We need so we're instructed throughout the New Testament to be sober-minded.
Yeah. That's an important term.
And of course, that means so much more than don't be drunk.
Right.
But it doesn't mean less.
Right.
It doesn't mean less.
Yeah. Right. Be ready. Be awake.
So those are a
lot
few
of that terminology.
I like to couch it in the bigger biblical theology, even of understanding what is the goal of our Christian life. What is the goal of redemption? And one way to look at the fall is that distortion of sin came in to this world. It affected us so that we don't see things as they really are. That our hearts became confused. And so the journey of redemption is to clarity, to seeing God and experiencing him in our physical bodies, in the resurrection as he really is. And does marijuana move us closer to that goal down the line in that goal or further away from it? And in every pastoral situation I've come across so far, it's been the latter. It moves us further away from that goal of experiencing and knowing the reality of the glory of God in our physical bodies as we were intended to.
Yeah, so sin always comes masquerading, doesn't it?
It distorts.
It never presents itself as it actually is. because I think that if we saw sin for what it actually was, we wouldn't do it.
Right.
We wouldn't do it. Now, it's easier to see sin as it actually is in other people, right? You know, because we've all been in situations where people are telling us, hey, you know, I'm thinking about doing this. I know it's not the right thing, but I think it'll be best for me. And we're like, man, I'm not a prophet, but I can see you're just racing off the cliff. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And your pathetic justifications for this thing, you've got to be kidding. You've got to be kidding. It's harder to detect that in ourselves, isn't it?
Yep. And Todd, in your talk, I remember you using, you just asked this question, will cannabis use enhance the Christian's ability to use his or her gifts? And I think that actually relates both to the medical side, because it could help in that side, but then in a recreational side, are you actually more in tune with your gifts and using your gifts for the local church, for the glory of God, for the kingdom, and so forth and so on, or are those actually being depressed and dampened because of the use? And I think that's a great question to ask.
And maybe that's one of the clarifying question where, so caffeine, as you described, it might actually help.
Right.
You know, for myself, I love caffeine. I hate the way I feel when I'm chemically dependent upon it, though. And so I'm constantly just saying, I can't create an artificial dependence on this. And the thing that's nice, if I'm not just on caffeine all the time, and because at that point I'm just maintaining headaches, right? Or trying to relieve them. But if I don't have that chemical dependence, then I can actually use caffeine strategically and intentionally, occasionally, and it's helpful at that point.
In terms of suffering, it seems like sometimes it's used for just fun, and then other times it could be used as an escape mechanism. How would it relate to a kind of biblical view of suffering?
Yeah, I think that's a helpful question. Because the thing I've run into is that it seems like as I go to churches and talk, that the response I get is people are smoking pot for kind of two broad reasons. One is just the euphoric sense of being high, and another is just to anesthetize. I think both of those have troubling discipleship implications, but the anesthetizing is probably more so.
And not just marijuana, all kinds of ways that even, and this bleeds into the medical discussion, is are we just seeking to alleviate and escape any form of suffering in a way that scriptures would warn us against? How many of the Psalms would be written if David was, high?
Yeah, there you go. No,
that's what we should title this.
Yeah,
there you go. That's the next title.
And I think that's a very good point, because in America we think suffering avoidance is critical. The Bible doesn't treat suffering that way. It treats it variably. Don't be a masochist. Don't suffer just for the sake of suffering. We want to help
serve people that are suffering.
Absolutely. So relief of suffering is a biblical theme.
Sure.
But also the lessons learned through suffering and enduring through suffering, and so you come away as you put together like a biblical theology of suffering, that avoidance of suffering is not the priority necessarily.
This side of glory, that is not the aim, the ultimate aim, this side of glory.
And although that's what modern society basically is preaching, just alleviate every form of suffering you can. And obviously we want to address it with compassion, but according to the scriptures, suffering produces something in us.
That's right.
Produces character,
more
endurance, formation.
It can.
Yeah. Okay. Two maybe final questions. Pastorally, what do you do? You're in a church. You're a pastor, youth pastor, discipling someone, and they're smoking weed. And how do you? I mean, we've addressed probably the background kind of ethical issues, biblical issues, but I guess I'm getting more to, is this a discipling or discipline issue?
Right.
What do you say to that person at this point? Obviously, I think some of the stuff we've said already would be a huge part of that conversation. But what if, just to get more specific, they disagree and they're like, I just disagree. I think I should be able to do this, but I want to continue to come to your church. What do you do pastorally, or a youth pastor?
Well, if you're a youth pastor, I think what has been said in the past can still be said. It's illegal for you.
Yeah,
right.
and it's illegal for a good reason.
Right.
It's a good reason. So we could start there. But then you want to lean into it a little bit more. Why?
I think that's really good. Yeah.
What is going on in your life that you feel this need for either the pursuit of pleasure,
Right.
or are you anesthetizing something? Because the scriptures don't want us, not scriptures. The scriptures teach God doesn't want us to just anesthetize our problems. He wants us to go through the hard work of sanctification, to deal with these things. And most of the time, we're not just depressed because we're depressed. And there are people who struggle from depression for that. A lot of times, people are depressed because, quite frankly, they ought to be depressed. Right. And they've got some things they've got to work out. Mm-hmm. And so I think the job of a pastor and elder is to come alongside and say, let's begin to work on these things with you. Well, is there sin in your life? Is there identity issues? What's going on with you? Mm-hmm.
I think that's really good, Todd. I would want to encourage a pastor at this, when someone's saying, I smoke marijuana and I think it's good, that this is where I would want to tell the pastor, don't jump to the pat answer and saying, well, stop it. But ask good questions.
Right.
Get to the heart of the matter, because the way you're going to serve that individual is by them seeing why it's not good for them or beneficial. All the warning signs might be there for you, and you may see it's really bad for them, and you're right. But you need to help them see that by asking good questions and giving them a worldview that the scriptures give.
That's good. So it's a discipling issue initially. And do you think, what if it continues and they reject the pastoral care? What happens then? What do you think? I mean, obviously, it's hard to answer that question. I acknowledge, because every situation is different.
Every situation is different. We have had, issues in our church where marijuana has been part of what has led to a church discipline issue. Usually, by that point, there's a lot of other things as well. If someone is just habitually smoking marijuana, not wanting the counsel of the church, and ignoring the counsel of those around them.
Yeah, it's good to talk about, though, because I think, maybe even states where it's not legal, there could be kind of, as you said, just to stop it. That's terrible.
Right.
But we need to think, this whole episode has been, we need to think biblically and ethically and well about these things, and not just kind of, like you said, jump to, this is anathema for us.
Sure. Yeah.
This is something we need to think through well and use it as a discipleship means.
And communicating love and care and concern.
Yeah.
This is the reason why we want to talk about this, is not just so that you can check off the boxes, but because we're invested in your life and the outcome of your faith. We care about you.
Right. Should this be addressed from the pulpit, this issue?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
When you come across texts about sober-minded and drunkenness and so forth and so on, or just a special teaching on it.
Sure.
You think it's worthwhile to be bringing up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to engage the issue. That's why you guys are having the podcast.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for coming on with us. I think it's been really helpful, and we appreciate it and hope this has been helpful for everyone who's listened.
Thanks for listening to Food Trucks in Babylon. The music you hear is provided by our friends at Humble Beast Records. If you like the show, please leave us a review and feel free to subscribe. To learn more about Western Seminary, visit us at westernseminary.edu.